The siege towers were ready and the gates were wide open for Xanthippus. The large number of missile troops would not save the last Thracian city from their doom. Xanthippus was eager to finish the Thracians, and it would be rude of him to keep them waiting. A single siege tower breaches the walls and the hoplites manning the equipment race for the city gates, cutting down the paltast that defended the structure. The missile infantry easily fall to the hoplites' blades, and soon the city gates were under Greek control. The gate's defences made short work of the Volksmen that stood guard before the gap in the defences. With the falling of the last few, the awaiting hoplites entered the city, those on the walls gaining control of the towers along the way to the plaza. Nothing stood between the hoplites and the city centre, the other half of the Thracian army just staring at Xanthippus and the rest of the unmoving Greek force. The militia cavalry charge into the armoured hoplites, and they do not fare well against the spearmen. The last few stand well against the onslaught of hoplites, but it would not last forever. The hoplites gained control of the city, but the rest of the Thracians had other ideas about that, their king racing ahead of what remained of the infantry, and into the mass of Greek spearmen, with little to no tact about how he did so. Volksmen attempt to charge into the hoplites' flank, but their technique was flawed and they only gain a face full of spears. Mucapai Bes goes down, and with him the Thracian Empire. Now only the straggling infantry remained. A singular man of phalanx pikemen tries to valiantly hold off the hoplites. Said hoplites are quick to end the man's suffering, and the remaining Thracian archers fall quickly from both Greek arrows and spears. The last Thracian goes down, and victory was the Greeks. Xanthippus eagerly enters the city and leaves the occupants be. The Thracians were destroyed and they would no longer plague Greek lands, although with the capture of Campus Gati, the Greeks did gain a new neighbour. Dymas was a third of his way through the conquest of Sicily, and the siege towers were ready for him to make that 2/3. The city hosted a fair mix of troops, though if any were to be a concern, it would be the early legionary cohort. Either way, Dymas severely outnumbered them, and he had a city to conquer. 2 siege towers are deployed, one to the west and the other east, and teams of hoplites and archers are assigned to each tower. With the teams in place, the crawl to the wall could begin. The walls enticingly bare before the Greek towers. With next to no hassle, both towers make it to the walls. With no resistance in their pass, the hoplites were able to capture all, if not most, of the structures along the Romans' walls. The awaiting teams were able to enter with ease. There was also the added bonus of the legionary cohort being shot down by their own defences. With a loss of only 5 men, the legionary cohort falls beneath the hoplites and break heart and run. To the south, the archer auxilia, 88 of their number remaining, charge into the entering hoplites in a foolish attempt to hold them back. They too are quick to turn tail and flee back to safety. Both teams group up before the final streets to the plaza, and as they await the final members, the Romans' cavalry auxilia race from around the corner and into the backs of the hoplites. They are swift to turn around and deal with the pesky cavalry that were throwing javelins down upon them. Of course, no cavalry can stand against the might of the hoplites, and a Scipii captain goes down with ease, the rest of his cohort fleeing to the plaza. The hoplites advance and the legionary cavalry charge into the approaching Greeks. The Romans' last chance at repelling the Greeks, thwarted by poor tactics. While the heavy cavalry were doing a good job at pushing through the spearmen, they had charged right into the fronts of the spearmen nonetheless. They too go down facing the onslaught of Greek hoplites. Swarms of golden men cut through the last few Romans of Messana, until finally the last horseman is taken down and another Roman city belonged to the Greeks.
Victory fit for the gods, a day of triumph to mark with a song or two.
The people of Messana were not too happy with their new rulers, and so the dissenters were put to death, and the city was much happier. Seeing as the Dacians now wanted to wage war against the Greeks, it only made sense that Xanthippus' next target would be the Dacian capital of Porolissum. He deploys his spies ahead, ready for his arrival within the next year or so. Hero's presence appeared to be enough to deter the Gaul for now, so with that goal achieved, he moves back east, ready for his own assault on Dacian lands. Before he leaves though, he hires all the mercenaries available in the area, sending them to Massilia to form a suitable defence.
My lord, leaving the army.
With his troops retrained, it was time for Dymas to finish his quest. A small Scipii army stood in his way, and while he could have gone around, they would have needed to have been dealt with eventually either way. Light auxilia and some heavy cavalry. Easy enough to deal with. The militia cavalry are sent in, harassing the Romans from both sides, the cavalry and missile troops easily going down from the militia's javelins. Dymas wasn't too concerned about losing any of his militia, he wouldn't need them during the next siege, and so when the javelins run dry, the militia charge into the Romans, taking it upon themselves to divert from the light auxilia into the Roman cavalry. Through the combined efforts of 4 units of militia cavalry, the heavy Roman cavalry goes down, and the battle is won. Another victory under his belt, Dymas continues on for Lilybaeum. Xanthippus' spies make it into Paralysum. It appeared that the Dacians were preparing for the Greeks' arrival, though cavalry wouldn't be the suitable choice for facing the hoplites. As predicted, Captain Secundus parked himself outside of Rome. Her occupants would be able to handle whatever the Romans threw at them, if they attacked. In the transition of years, the cowardly Dacians approached Xanthippus with the offer of a ceasefire, in exchange for a generous payment of 16,000 denarii from the Greeks. Xanthippus told them to sod off. The Romans had yet to make a move on retaking Rome. Interesting, though not as interesting as that approaching Dacian army from the north. Mostly warband, but another hoplite in Batavium wouldn't go amiss. The band of mercenaries make it into Massilia, and it appeared that the Brits had come a far way down to deal with the Germanians. Hero continues his journey east, stopping partway to place down a watchtower to keep an eye out for any barbarians that would think to use the valleys between his land and theirs. Dymas finally reaches Lilybaeum and proceeds to build 3 siege towers, but the gates were open. Perhaps he should give the Romans a fighting chance by foregoing the siege towers this time. The hoplites race in through the north gate and into the awaiting light auxilia, having only lost less than a dozen of their men in the process. With a second unit of hoplites joining soon after, the auxilia don't last long against the combined attack and flee. The gates now under their control, the rest of the attack force enter the city and makes for the plaza. Drawn over by arrow fire, the Roman leader charges into the awaiting hoplites, crashing and jumping through their line and doing well to quickly reduce the hoplites' numbers. The rest of the hoplites move in to support their fellow soldier. It was a tough fight, a lot of Greek men falling in the process, but eventually the Roman leader's will to fight breaks and he retreats. The hoplites cutting down as many of the panicking horsemen as they could. Alas, the fight was not over. Legionary cavalry still remained and they charged into and surrounded the remaining hoplites. Whilst they were engaged, Aulus the Cold-Hearted skirted around the tussle and into the archers positioned behind. He cut down the missile infantry with ease, but the archers would not stand idly. 200 bows faced the Roman leader, and with a symphony of twangs from bowstrings, the last Roman family member is killed. The legionary cavalry also overpower the hoplites, causing them to break and flee, but there were still plenty of archers to deal with the horsemen. "74 hoplites regained their courage and re-engaged with the cavalry, eventually defeating them. Soon, the last Roman man stood in the centre, given a quick death courtesy of the archers.
This is a victory fit for the gods, and I have triumphed to mark with a song or two.
The troops certainly had a good reason to cheer, as Dymas entered the city and removed the last few who were still loyal to the Roman cause. With that, he too had destroyed a faction and became a conqueror. Now all that was left to gain such a title was the youngest of the 3. The seasons changed once more, and with it nothing good. The Dacians once more besieged Batavium, their force nothing special, though they did have the foresight to bring siege equipment. Not that it would do any good against stone walls. Of course, it was not to be expected that the Gaul would stay away for too long as they besieged Massilia. Outside of the newly acquired Lilybaeum, agents get to work tidying up the surrounding lands. Newly rebelled Captain Secundus, now reduced in numbers, was no longer a concern to the Greeks. If anything, he would be a relic of times gone by. Hero makes his way over to Batavium, finding himself just outside of the reach of the Dacian force. At the very least, he would be able to reinforce in the case of an assault. Massilia did not have such luck of having reinforcements. Their merry band of peasants and mercenaries would have to defend their city. They had the numbers advantage, but there was no way the peasants could withstand an assault from even the most basic of Gaul units. The mercenaries at least had a chance. Predictably, the Gaul had backed up to the side of the city and had taken the high ground. The occupants of Massilia followed them out, lining up before them, the barbarian mercenaries on one flank, the peasants backed by cavalry on the other. The Gauls sent their cavalry into the peasants, and while they had the horsemen completely surrounded, they still crumbled beneath the barbarians' hooves. The mercenary cavalry moved to get behind the Gaul, hoping the peasants would hold on for a little longer. All but 2 units of peasants were fleeing, and the cavalry charged in. With 1 unit of peasants still keeping the will to fight, the Gaul cavalry were eventually repelled, though not without heavy losses. But it was not over yet. The peasants had just recovered and another wave of Gaul was coming their way. Warband, closely followed by mercenaries. The peasants pinned the Gaul and the cavalry got to work charging into the Gaul's rear, causing them to almost immediately break. The mercenaries were next, and seeing their patrons flee, they followed their boss's lead. Another wave of warband and another successful pin and flank, though they were holding out better than the others. At the top of the hill, the mercenaries were holding steady. They had lost 1 unit to a poorly timed charge, and the Gaul all but surrounded them now. Taking matters into their own hands, they charged into the Gaul, hoping that their slightly superior arms and armour would do the trick. Through luck, the cavalry take down the Gaul captain. That would certainly make repelling these marauders much easier, although the peasants were once more running for the city. It took much grueling fighting, but eventually the Gaul began to break before the mercenaries, and with each broken Gaul, more mercenaries could pile onto the ones that remained. And soon all that was left was for the cavalry to chase down the stragglers. Not the prettiest battle, no, but the city remained in Greek hands, the Gaul army sent whimpering back home. Now for the defence of another fine Greek city. Amnestos was sure he would be able to hand the Sally fine enough on his own, but the reassurance that his father would be waiting in the wings in case things went south was comforting. Although, come the day of battle, Amnestos had not heard of the arrival of his father, and time was running short. He would have to start without him. It was time to deploy the militia cavalry, the archers on the wall doing good work picking off those that they can. The Dacians had let their ballista fall behind, and the militia would kindly show them the errors of their way, charging up and effortlessly taking the crew down, and that one simple act was enough for the Dacians to call the retreat. The militia followed, picking off all that they could during the flight through the forest. The Dacians eventually get away. The Dacians beat a hasty retreat back to their own borders, and Amnestos once more improves, becoming a superior commander. In the summer of 227 BC, Dymas finally had everything ready in order to leave the island and move on to his next conquest. His army and agents embark onto the ship that would be their home for the next several years to come. Xanthippus too was ready to move on to his next conquest. Leaving Campus Gaiety in the hands of some trustworthy peasants and trainees, he sets course west for Paralysum. Back with Batavium, Hero with Amnestos once more in tow, the faction leader wasn't getting any younger, pushes the Dacians that stood between him and Sergestica out of the way. He considered leaving them there, cowering before him, but if Hero didn't deal with them now, that small Dacian force would no doubt come back and cause all kinds of trouble within his empire. Better to deal with them now. The Greeks found themselves upon a high ridge, towering over the Dacians below. The Cretans stepped forth and fired down on the helpless barbarians. The Dacians fell easily under the Cretans' arrows, shuffling in their spots as more became available, until the last few remained. Amnestos took chase, but the cowardly men were able to escape before the general could reach them. With one set of Dacians out of the way, Hero could continue his trek to Segestica in peace. Winter arrives and the standing Dacian army had garrisoned in the large town. They were mostly warband, but that was more Dacians in the way of capturing the town. At the very least, Hero can count on his 3 rams to do the job. Not far to the east, Xanthippus finishes his journey to Paralysum and lays siege to the city. He orders the construction of 3 rams and has a closer look at the details of the general that hid within the city. Seeing as the gates were open and the Dacian general clearly was no threat to him, Xanthippus orders the go-ahead on the assault. Teams of hoplites and archers are split between 3 of the open gates, making their way round to and through the gates, the archers softening the way in. The hoplites approach the plaza from the north and south, meeting heavy resistance along the way, the southern team having much easier time entering compared to the northern. The southern team are the first to make it to the tiny plaza. They push through the infantry and take them down with ease. During their swarm, they capture Dregus the Bloody-Handed within their waves, and he too goes down with the rest of his men. The last few shattered units of infantry remained in the centre, but like many before them, they cannot withstand the might of Spartan steel. The last men go down and Xanthippus secures himself yet another victory and city. Paralysum had a delusioned but large population, and Xanthippus did not intend to stay for long, so the population had a bit of a trim down. Thoughts of Hero's mortality were ever increasing. He was not going to live forever as much as he wanted to, so perhaps it was time to pick an heir from his sons. Each had their own merits, but it seemed that Amnestos had the most potential at that moment. It also helped that he was travelling with him too. From Syracuse to Croton, Dymas sailed, completing the first leg of many of this arduous trek. Hero's rams were ready and it was time to capture another city. As is standard by now, teams are assigned to different gates around the city. To the south, a majority of the Dacians' defence congregated, including the singular artillery crewman that had escaped from Batavium. His death lacked the fire to make it a Viking's funeral, but it was close enough. The Spartans entered the city from all 3 sides, the Cretans as always clearing the way beforehand. The southern team obviously faces the heaviest resistance, the warband stubbornly refusing to budge. They too eventually fall, and with plentiful fleeing light infantry, Hero invites himself in to help deal with them. Once Hero had his fill of fun, the hoplites converge on the plaza from all sides, whittling away at the remaining Dacians. Soon only a few folksmen remain. Through some means of luck, the man dodges each thrust of the Spartan spears, but he fails to dodge the swift sword to the head. Another Dacian city belonged to the Greeks, and the population was happy enough, and like his sons, Hero did not intend to stay long, so the population was reduced through slavery. And move on Hero shall. Amnestos steps outside the city and hires the local mercenaries to hold garrison in the city. With the mercs in place, Hero and Amnestos make their way for a quincum. That winter, Xanthippus was ready for his next Dacian city too. He steps out the city, his last order being the recruitment of most of the population to become trained peasants. He also hires out the local mercenaries to fill in the city's force. He didn't trust the Scythians not to do anything now that they were neighbours. With Paralysum set, he marches on for Campus Yazuges. From Croton, Dymas sails across the Ionian Sea to the port of Termon. The journey was almost a third of the way over. Back with Hero, the Dacian faction heir had been spotted. Damastor departed from the party to deal with the man, approaching with a confident stalk. The man falls without any issues. Truly a professional's work. Come summer, Dymas sails for Sparta, and Hero's quest for a quincum is cut short by another Dacian army that was no doubt heading straight for Segestica. Hero could not allow a blatant show of arrogance like that go unpunished. Once more it appeared that the Greeks had found themselves upon a ridge looking down upon the Dacians. The Cretans got to work thinning out their numbers, the infantry fell easily under the rain of arrows, making no attempts to counter or save themselves. Soon enough all that remained were the cavalry and war dogs. The horsemen weren't exactly hard targets to hit and they fell apart like wet tissue paper. Volley after volley rained down, plenty of cavalry falling with them. The captain goes down and what was left of his men run for the hills. Arrows were able to take most of them before they got out of range. The Greek cavalry raced down the mountain to catch any of the stragglers, but to no avail. Xanthippus makes it to the walls of Campus Yazyges, and the spies that had the gates wide open and are waiting for him. It would be rude not to accept such an invitation. The Dacians had been holding back heavy infantry and cavalry, chosen archers and onagers. The Dacians were certainly spoiling Xanthippus today. The hoplites and archers formed 4 teams, each taking a gate of their own. The eastern gates held the onager, so as the hoplites ran to hug the wall, the archers got to work with setting alight the wooden artillery. Volley after volley, and the onagers were not catching on fire, though the crew were delightfully crispy. After the 5th attempt, the archers went back to regular arrows and finished them off. Elsewhere in the city, hoplites marched through the gates. On each side of the city, the hoplites began their final approach, coming to the bottom of the hill to the centre. Of course, there was some resistance to their advance, but the hoplites weren't too overly concerned, though the barbarian noble cavalry that was rapidly approaching was cause for concern. The cavalry crash into the hoplites and take down one man. If anything, they held themselves very well in place for a second unit of hoplites to easily stab them in the backs. On the other flanks, the hoplites steadily made for the centre, and the cavalry finally broke. With the paths now mostly cleared, the hoplites continued their steady march of pointy death, the southern team making it to the plaza first, shortly followed by the northern. The western team make it in time to see the final Dacians go down. And Xanthippus gains another city. The people were mostly happy, so they were only enslaved. With Xanthippus going through Dacian settlements like they were nothing, Hero changed course for Salona. It was time to get his city back. Xanthippus sends his spies ahead to Aquincum and finds that barely anyone was home. In the port of Sparta, Dymas trades 9 of his armoured hoplites for some of Sparta's speciality. It seemed quite fitting for a son of Sparta to conquer the east in the name of Sparta with his own cohort of Spartans. With his new troops loaded, he sets off for the port of Kydonia, just 1 hop away from Rhodes. Hey there guys, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and even consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this. Unfortunately, from this weekend onwards, I'm going to have to be a functioning member of society once more, but at the very least everything has been recorded and I'd estimate that we have 5 more episodes to go. Thank you all again for watching, bye!